Hello, and welcome to or welcome back to Lauren's Legends. Today, I am bringing you the harrowing story of a 19-year-old girl that gets trapped for 17 days when an 8-story building collapses on her. She survives unbearable temperatures, being stuck with deceased coworkers, and only has a little bit of food and water to survive on. And with that, here is her story. On the morning of April 24, 2013, Reshma Begum was rushing to her job at a garment factory on the outskirts of Bangladesh. She was a very responsible 19-year-old that never missed work and never was late. But today was different. She was upset and worried. You see, the day before, most of her colleagues had been complaining about cracks that were showing up in the 8-story building where they worked. Everyone was scared to work there with all of the heavy equipment, but the owner of the building, Sohel Raina, had demanded that they get back to work, and if they didn't show up, they would lose their job. Reshma needed her job. Pushing her negative thoughts aside, she picked up her pace. But then it dawned on her that in her rush, she had forgotten about food. She quickly stopped at a stand and bought 4 small packages of biscuits, thinking that should be enough to get her through her workday. As she reached her building, she quickly made her way up to the 3rd floor to start work as a seamstress, making clothes for the Western world. She calmed a little because she had made it just in time. She had begun to zone out doing the work she did every day, but then the power went out. She looked up alarmed and saw the alarm of her coworkers' faces. Several people began to stand up from their desks trying to get information about what was going on, but their managers yelled at them to stay where they were and to continue working. The generators would kick in at any minute. The generators did come on, but Reshma began to feel a little bit of a vibration under her. She pushed her chair back to stand, and when she stood and got to her feet, her legs were vibrating. She made a snap decision and took off running to the stairs. As soon as she started going down them, it felt like the whole building was moving around her. She was just making it through the doorway on the 2nd floor when everything collapsed around her and it went dark. A few moments later, the crushing noises faded to an odd and eerie calm. Reshma was trying to breathe, but the air was just so thick. Her eyes were ever so slowly beginning to adjust to the dark. She tried to move her head to get her bearings, but something was gripping her hair tight. She reached behind her to feel her hair stuck under pieces of the building. It slowly began to hit her that the whole building had collapsed and she was now stuck in a very small cavity. Panic set in and she did the only thing she could think to do, and that was to begin ripping out her hair that was stuck. As painful as it was, it worked and she freed her head. She sat up and looked at all the debris around her. And then she realized she wasn't just looking at pieces of the building. There were at least 3 bodies around her. There was nothing she could do to get away and was destined to sit there and yell and hope that someone, anyone, would hear her. After the shock of what was happening began to wear off, the hunger set in. And then she remembered the biscuits that she had gotten that fateful morning. She began to nibble just a little bit at a time, making sure to conserve her scarce supply of that life-saving accident. As the hours went on in that little area, it felt hotter and hotter. It was at least 90 degrees in there and it smelled horribly. To distract herself and to try and stay sane, she began taking a stick she found and hitting it on the debris around her. A few days in, she had run out of biscuits and she had to check the bodies of her coworkers for any kind of goods. And in a miracle, they had dry food in their pockets. Reshma wanted to cry, but she knew she was too dehydrated to waste fluid on tears. She said a prayer of gratefulness to them as she was eating. She heard a strange noise above her, and then out of a small hole, a water bottle fell through and landed by her feet. She could not believe it, but quickly grabbed it and began drinking. It was so hard for her to stop, but another bottle fell in. This is one of the biggest mental victories she could have had to press her to not give up. More days went on, and then she realized she was hearing voices. She would later say, "I heard voices of the rescue workers over several days. I kept hitting the wreckage with sticks and rods just to attract their attention, but no one heard me. That was so bad for me. I began to think I'd never see the light of day again." What she didn't know was above her there was a huge rescue operation going on all day and all night. The team were doing everything possible to get down into those 8 stories of rubble. The teams were told to push water bottles down every hole and little crevice that they came around and to be constantly looking and listening for any sign of life. Reshma could hear the teams and voices and the machinery getting closer. Knowing that as loud as she could hear them, they must be close. She decided to give it her all and was banging on metals with a pole in her left hand while she reached up as far into the cavity she could with her other hand and began to wave her stick. The rescuers above her were moving on top of her at this time, and there was a huge concrete slab in their way. They were deciding to demolish it in hopes that they could get underneath it. But what they didn't know was that slab was what was keeping the small air pocket safe that she was stuck in. The bulldozers began to remove the debris in front of the slab, and they removed just enough that one of the rescuers standing by began to hear a very faint cry for help. The stunned crew ordered the loud equipment to immediately stop, and everyone stood there extremely quiet, and the amazed workers saw the very end of the stick moving back and forth. Every worker swarmed the area. They used every tool they had, handsaws, welding tools, drills, everything they could to get the debris out of the way. And after 40 minutes, there she was looking back at them alive. Reshma could almost not believe it was the sun hitting her face, but it was so beautiful and so bright. Hands were reaching down to her from everywhere, and before she knew it, she was being pulled from the carnage and being placed on a stretcher. They immediately gave her water. She had run out of water 2 days before, and that first sip was the best tasting water she had ever had. They also gave her oxygen and an IV of fluids. The entire crowd that had been absolutely defeated. Day after day, they had been pulling bodies of their neighbors, families, and friends, and then they saw an absolute miracle occur. Every one of them began cheering and crying. For Reshma, she had been rescued after 17 days or 408 hours. For the workers, they had been rescued from losing all of their hope. Reshma was rushed to the hospital, and even though she was severely dehydrated, she was amazingly in great condition. She had survived the impossible, but had continued to push on. She had been stuck down there in the 90-degree heat and found out after the fact that she had been found all the way down in the basement. Reshma decided to do the absolute best with her life after this, and to help others as much as she could. And to this day, she is still out in her community giving back. She now works at a 5-star motel and has a husband and a daughter. She understandably does not like to relive these horrible moments and this ordeal, and still has very hard nights with her PTSD of just being in complete darkness where she can't sleep, but has said that it is all worth it to be alive. Reshma's story is absolutely amazing, but you may be asking yourself, what in the heck and how did this happen? Well, this building was originally a 6-story building, and the very greedy owner got a corrupt mayor to approve him to add on 2 stories to the top. The work done was shoddy at best, and it was an accident waiting to happen. On the morning of April 24, 2013, over 3,000 garment workers showed up to go to work. Over 2,600 people were severely injured, and over 1,100 people were killed, resulting in the deadliest disaster in the clothing industry ever. It is gut-wrenching to think about the people there the very day before complaining about how dangerous the building was, but had then been forced to go back and work in these conditions. Most of those people died. In good news, and hopefully a lesson, the owner of the building and 37 other people were charged with murder and held responsible for the deaths of the 1,100 people. I truly hope that this horrible tragedy can help bring light to how important human life is over financial gain. And with that, this amazing story about a young 19-year-old woman who never gave up, and a community that needed to find her and remember to never lose hope in its darkest moment. Thank you for watching. Please give that like button a tap, and I will see you next time.